Hey guys, Steve here with Rocky Mountain ATV EMC. Today I'm going to show you how to inspect your dirt bike transmission. You're out riding with your buddies and you suspect that you have an issue with your transmission, or you have your engine torn apart and you need to inspect your transmission. Today I'm going to show you the components and how to disassemble and assemble your transmission and what to look for wear or parts that need to be replaced. To do this job, you're just going to need some contact cleaner and some good snap ring pliers. Always refer to your OEM service manual for more information and proper procedures. Now we've started with this motor completely disassembled and our transmission already out. If you need help with this, refer to our top and bottom end rebuild videos to get to that point where you can inspect your transmission. This inspection process is pretty generic with most dirt bike transmissions, but this specific transmission is from a 2015 KTM 300 XCW. First, we want to start with a clean transmission. That will make inspection a lot easier. First, let's grab our main shaft, and we want to go over the main shaft and check every gear. We got our first gear that's fixed. We have the next gear that's on it is a freewheel gear. We have our slider gear, another freewheel gear, and then another fixed gear. We just want to go over the function of those, just make sure that they're moving freely and doing what we want them to do. And then we can move to the counter shaft and do the same thing. We want to check the freewheel gears, we want our slider gears, make sure they're sliding, and then our freewheel gears again, our slider gear, and then the next freewheel gear. Now the thing with the freewheel gears is if it wobbles, your bearing's probably bad, it's just something to look for. And your slider gears, if there's a lot of play back and forth, then it's probably worn out on the splines, and that's something we'll need to look for when we disassemble. And then with our fixed gear, they're fixed. There's really not much there other than the teeth wear. Now that we've given it a brief inspection, let's go ahead and disassemble it. We'll start with the main shaft. So anytime that you disassemble your transmission, you're going to want to line everything up the same way that you took it apart. And so I've used this white sheet of paper here to show you that example. So give yourself plenty of room. So first we had the washer, and then we'll do our first gear, and just lay them out as you pull them off so that when you inspect them and reassemble them, you can put it back the right way. They're kind of like a puzzle. It kind of only goes one way, but it just makes the process easier. So we'll just move on to the next gear, which is a freewheel gear. Take our bearing off. Now if you look at this bearing, it's a little bit different than what you'll probably see in most transmissions. This one is flexible, and you can actually remove it by sliding it over top of the splines. Just be careful with these are pretty delicate. And next we will remove our washer. Now let's remove the snap ring. Now most transmissions don't use this style of snap ring, but just be careful and take your time. Next is our slider gear, another snap ring. Now our washer, and our next freewheeling gear, and bearing. Next, let's disassemble our counter shaft. Start with washer, freewheeling gear. Make sure to get your bearing. Another washer. We have a slider, snap ring. Next, a washer. Another freewheeling gear, bearing. Another freewheeling gear and bearing. Washer, snap ring, and now our next slider, another snap ring, next another washer, another freewheeling gear, bearing. Now that we've got both shafts disassembled, we'll go ahead and start with the main shaft and inspect it. Make sure to follow along with your service manual as you go through your transmission. We have a fixed gear on the main shaft, so we want to start with all the teeth and go over each one of them to see if there's any hairline fractures or cracks or chips. And then we want to move to all of our bearing surfaces to make sure they're smooth, no galling, and then move on to all of our splines and go over every one of those. What will happen with the spline is when they start to wear there, it won't slide as easy. If the flat surface of the bearing is galled, obviously it's not going to spin as easy. And so that's what we need to look for on the main shaft. Next, we want to check out the bearings. Now these are needle bearings, so you want to go over each bearing and roll them, make sure they move smoothly, look for galling or if it's missing any or if the cage itself is damaged. This one looks in pretty good shape, so we're going to continue on. Next, we want to check the inner surface of our gear and make sure it's nice and smooth, no galling, and then go over each tooth on it as well and look for chips or cracks or hairline fractures. And then we want to move to the other side of the gear where our dogs are. Now when you inspect the dogs in your transmission, this is a high wear item. You want to look for the edges to be nice and sharp instead of rounded over. They can also chip right here, but that's one of the spots in your transmission that you're definitely going to want to inspect. Next, all your washers, they consider them thrust washers, but you just need to check them out. They'll get polished up, which is fine. If there's any galling on it, that just means that on the side of the gear as well, there's going to be galling, and you're going to want to replace both of those as well if that's the case. Now with the snap rings, you never want to reuse your snap rings. They're pretty cheap and inexpensive, and you don't want a failure in the future after you've reassembled your motor, so just get new ones. Our next gear is a slider gear. This one has dogs on both sides. Not all slider gears have dogs on both sides, but this one does. You want to check the groove on the inside of the gear. This is where your shift fork would go. And you want to look in the side of that for galling or heat discoloration. And then obviously go back over all of your teeth for chips and cracks and that sort. And then grab your shift fork and let's check out the shift fork. You want to look at the pads here for wear there. We got a little teeny bit of wear, nothing out of the ordinary. Go ahead and insert that in the gear. Make sure that it's going to move freely. Now when inspecting your shift fork, if they are slightly bent, you'll see the pad wear on one side and not the other. If that's the case, you definitely need to replace these, and these get bent probably easier than not. So that's definitely something you want to inspect. Now let's move to our countershaft. Another high wear item on it is where your sprocket is installed onto. You want to check out the splines for wear there. Because it's out in the elements and it gets lack of lubrication, it is much a higher wear item. So we definitely want to check that out. We'd hate to have to replace this because of not changing our sprocket on our bike more often than not. Now the rest of the shaft is a lot the same as our main shaft. We just want to check out our splines and our bearing surfaces to make sure they're in decent shape. Now this freewheeling gear, this one has slots, and that would be the opposite side of the dogs. This is another really high wear item that you want to check out. So if they're rounded edges and your bike kicks out of gear, that's probably a good indicator of why it is. The function of it is when you slide your slider over to your freewheel, those dogs grab the slots, and that's what makes it fixed. And so because your slider is fixed on the shaft, it's always spinning. And a freewheeler, because it's freewheeler, it just spins. So to lock the freewheeler onto the shaft, that's how that happens. The sliders come over, the dogs grab the slots, and then they spin the shaft. My last note on inspection is if you're looking at the teeth and the tops of them still have a flat spot, they probably have enough wear there. If the flat spot has gone away and they're fairly sharp, then it probably needs to be replaced. Now if you end up having to replace a gear in your transmission, you need to replace the corresponding gear as they need to wear together. If you stick a transmission with brand new teeth on a meshing with another gear that has a lot of wear on it, it's not going to go well. You could have some more damage in the future instead of trying to fix it in the first place. So just be aware of that. And now just continue on through all the rest of the components and inspect them the same way that we showed you just previously. Now that we've gone through all of our gears and inspected them, if there is a broken gear that you do need to replace and the corresponding gear that it meshes with is not damaged, it's probably a good idea to replace that anyway because you want them to wear evenly together. So for example, if this gear is off the main shaft and this gear is off the counter shaft and you're replacing this gear, it's going to mesh with this and you need them to wear evenly together. So if I replace this one, I should probably replace this one as well. So now let's reassemble our main shaft and counter shaft, and then we can talk about shift drum and shift forks a little bit. We're going to start our assembly process with this counter shaft first, and we are going to assemble it the same way that we disassembled it. You also want to use some assembly lube on all the machine surfaces and bearings to do this. Now some bike manufacturers recommend a specific type of grease when assembling your transmission. Always refer to your service manual for this information. Now remember, do not reuse your circlips. You want to use new circlips. So Now most bikes require the circlips to be installed in a certain orientation. Check your service manual for your bike's specific procedure. And now let's continue with our main shaft. Now that we've got those assembled, let's talk about the shift drum and the shift forks for a minute. Now these shift forks have these little guides that ride in these channels in the shift drum. And as you move the shift drum, it moves the fork back and forth, which essentially moves the gear back and forth like that to change your gears. So we want to inspect these guides and channels for excessive wear or any spot that it's going to get hung up. But we're going to put this transmission into the engine case and I'm going to twist it and show you kind of how that function's supposed to be. And it's a good idea to do that anyway so that when you're reassembling, you know that it's going to function well before you put your cases back together. Okay, now that I've got this mounted up into the transmission case, I wanted to show you the function of the shift drum and how it slides the forks back and forth, changing the gears back and forth. So it's a good idea to do this before you reassemble your motor all the way so that you make sure the function is there. So if you just twist this and rotate the motor at the same time, you can get them to shift back and forth. You can go all the way to 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and now 1st. And you just want to be able to smoothly shift back and forth through each one of them, applying tension to it. And that's it. I hope this helps you the next time you need to inspect or replace any parts in your transmission. If you need any OEM parts, come check us out at RockyMountainATVMC.com. And remember, all orders over $75 ship for free. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is Steve. Thanks for watching.